All right, guys. Hey, everybody. Looks like we are live right now. So if you're tuning in, welcome everybody to this special November edition of our FinCrime Friday chats. We had to move this one up a little bit because next week is going to be the Thanksgiving holiday, and the Serify and ACFCS offices will be closed next Friday. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate you tuning in. We've got a great conversation today. My name is Clayton Norman. As usual, I am your host. I'm the social media marketing manager for Serify and for ACFCS. We've got the excellent Brian Svoboda Kindle with us today. Brian, you want to say hey to everybody?
Hey, everybody. Great to be back with you.
Unfortunately, Erin O'Loughlin is not going to be joining us today. She had lost her voice. So we wish that Erin feels better and that she will be able to join us next month when we do our year-end review FinCrime Friday chat. So make sure that you're paying attention for the links for that so you can register and join us. Today, we are talking about sanctions, evasion, and enforcement trends. And we're going to get into that in a minute. But before we get too far into things, make sure that you are letting us know where you're tuning in from. We want to see where you're joining us from. We love seeing all those countries from all across the world showing up in our comments. Love seeing how big and international this incredible community of financial crime and compliance professionals is. Also, of course, do not forget that if you are not an ACFCS member, today is a great day to fix that. You can head right on over to acfcs.org, become a member. The value is incredible. You instantly get access to hundreds of hours of training, exclusive events, live events, virtual events, incredible courses, our whole backlog of podcasts and webcasts from all the years that we've been doing all of these incredible trainings. So there's no better way to enhance and empower and increase the efficacy of your career than by joining ACFCS today. And we've also got some incredible events coming up that you can find on the website as well. So already seeing some of those comments coming in. Love to see that. Islamiat, I hope I'm saying that correctly. If I'm not, please don't hold it against me. Tuning in from Winnipeg, but it's chilly up there today. Not sure, but thank you for joining us. We're glad to have you. Everybody else, please make sure that you're dropping in the comments where you're tuning in from. And as we go through the conversation today, engage with us. If you have questions, we would love to hear your questions. Brian will be happy to answer to the best of his ability, and he is incredibly capable at answering your questions. And if you have comments or if you have insight into the world of sanctions, evasion, sanctions enforcement, join the conversation. We want to hear from all of you. We love having that interaction with you. And so as usual, today we will kick things off by going through some headlines. We'll jump right into those. The first headline that we have, Lebanon, love to see that. First headline we have today is that Zeltox Enterprises Limited fined Canadian 176.9 million Canadian dollars for money laundering and sanctions evasion. So on October 22nd, 2025, Canada's regulator FinCrime imposed a record-breaking fine on Zeltox for failure to file suspicious transaction reports, despite evidence of laundering linked to sanctions evasion, ransomware, and child abuse material revenue. Brian, what's your take on this one?
Yeah, really interesting case. So this comes pretty close on the heels of a previous penalty against KuCoin, another major crypto exchange. That one was about 20 million Canadian, like 14 million US at the time. And for FinTrack, that was their record penalty, right? It was a significant monetary penalty. This one blows it out of the water in terms of the sheer dollar amount, but also in what the severity of the accusations are. It's something like 75,000 transactions, 7,500, I should say, transactions tied to Iran, other sanctioned jurisdictions, Russia, And in addition, Clayton, as you said, like really heinous transactions related to child sexual abuse material that weren't properly monitored or filed on, ransomware, et cetera. So, I mean, it shows a couple of things. I think, we've talked a few times on these sessions about whether sanctions evaders, financial criminals are like truly embracing crypto at scale, and the answer is like absolutely yes, right? And this Zeltox Enterprises also went by the name Cryptomos. It is disputing, it's appealing the penalty, partly on like technical grounds, saying that it was done by a foreign licensee, not by the main company. But allegedly, this in the industry, at least, this Cryptomos had a reputation as a kind of lax at best crypto exchange, and a crypto exchange that was known to facilitate some illicit activity. So, I think the penalty reflects the level of illicit activity that was allegedly taking place. I think it shows that sanctions evaders are really looking to exploit, either vulnerable or willing or both exchanges for a lot of these illicit transactions, including the ones tied to sanctions evasion. And in the crypto space, there's a number of potential vulnerabilities. Sometimes like crypto kiosks, crypto ATMs, get a lot of the attention, deservedly on the scam side. But when we look at the sheer volume of illicit activity, it still is taking place by most estimates through major exchanges, including some like brand names, right? And that's not surprising. It's probably the same in the banking sector, but from a risk perspective, it's worth keeping in mind. So interesting one. I think it shows FinTrack is serious about cracking down more broadly, but seems to be particularly focused on the crypto sector right now. It's also worth noting that Canada has an FATF evaluation coming up, I think starting this month. So they are looking to kind of, clean house, so to speak. But I think it's a good sign of things to come. FinTrack has in the past gotten some flack for not wielding its penalty authority in the same way that like U.S. regulators, European, Singapore, et cetera, have done in the past. And I think they're trying to, take it a little bit more seriously now.
Well, hard to get much more serious than $177 million. So
yeah, it'll get attention.
movement in the right direction. Okay, second headline. And we'll circle back on this one a little bit later on in the conversation as well. Prince Holding Group sanctioned by US and UK for large-scale pig butchering scam operations. So on October 14th, US authorities designated a Cambodian conglomerate as a transnational criminal organization for orchestrating romance/financial fraud schemes and facilitating sanctions evasion, freezing associated assets, and cutting off U.S. entity business ties. So this is just like so many echoes of things that we have talked about so many times on these conversations. Cambodia, pig butchering, romance scams. What's our takeaway from this one?
Yeah. I know we're going to dive into this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. I'll just kind of set up the details of it, and then we can dig into the case in a little bit. So, Prince Group was a alleged, essentially, scam empire, right? Run by this guy Chen Zi, also goes by Vincent Zi, formerly a Chinese national, then immigrated to Cambodia, set up shop there. I think he's a Cambodian citizen now, under indictment in this latest action, in addition to these sanctions against the group. So basically, he and his many employees, facilitators, etc., are accused of building a series of scam compounds, including some like pretty notorious ones. Jinbei is one of the names of his companies. Jinbei runs casinos, gaming in Cambodia, but also allegedly runs some major scam compounds. Essentially the indictment is really interesting. I recommend folks who are interested in this space, especially in like the transactional and laundering flow, take a look at that, because it really details out how someone ends up getting scammed in the US, Europe, or Asia. There's a lot of Asian scam victims too, pig butchering victims, how it moves from cryptocurrency. And in this case, it moved from crypto back into fiat and then back into crypto to be cleaned again through like gambling sites, investment in crypto mining. So it's an interesting transactional flow. But again, I think back in like, I want to say 2016, but don't quote me on that, there was a sanctions designation against like a mail fraud scamming group that was doing mail fraud against US citizens. And it was like a really big deal at the time. It was like, whoa, sanctions for fraud. And now this is, sanctions against a scam empire, and it's not new anymore. So it's really interesting to see the evolution of sanctions as a tool against not just like terrorist groups or state entities, but it's such a wide range of financial crime actors and financial crime in general. It makes sanctions really tricky in a lot of ways, but it also intersects it with like fraud compliance. You might have a victim who's getting scammed, and there might be sanctions implications. The wallet they're sending their crypto to, or the person they're sending their crypto to, might be under sanctions now. So it's not just a fraud case anymore. It's now, you have to freeze potentially, you have to report, etc. So I mean, just a fraud case. Fraud's still important too, but this adds a whole nother dimension to it. So we'll get in further to some of the details of the case. But I think it's great that it's happening, first of all. I think targeting these scam empires, they are sophisticated. Prince Group is a sophisticated transnational operation, much like a drug trafficking operation or, human trafficking operation. And they're absolutely a worthy and valid target for financial sanctions. So it's good to see.
All right, very cool. All right, headline number 3. North Korea condemns new U.S. sanctions amid cybercrime, laundering, and sanctions evasion networks. So on November 6th, North Korea responded angrily to U.S. sanctions targeting 8 individuals and 2 firms accused of laundering over $3 billion in digital assets from state-sponsored cybercrime used in part to fund its weapons program. So another confluence of things we've talked about here before with North Korea, with money laundering, crypto, and weapons programs. What do you think about this? This round of sanctions?
I don't think it's news that North Korea is mad about U.S. U.S. sanctions, right? But I think it emphasizes yet again that North Korea is like the most prolific sanctions evader in the crypto and cyberspace more broadly. They've gotten very good at it. They continue to be good at it, and they continue to adapt new models of sanctions evasion. In addition to crypto theft hacks, they did the Bybit hack earlier this year. At the time, was the largest theft of crypto, probably the largest theft of anything of value in like the history of humanity, arguably. And they've also shifted into remote work scams where they're placing employees, IT workers, and collecting paychecks as a way to evade sanctions. So yeah, very multifaceted threat, and very adaptable to both these sanctions designations and the approaches they use to get around them.
Is it safe to consider North Korea as the most heavily sanctioned country in the world right now?
Yeah, North Korea. I mean, certainly, yes, it is the most isolated, most financially isolated country, and that's why, in part, they've gone so heavily into cryptocurrencies because of the fact that that's their outlet to a financial system outside of the global financial system they've essentially been cut off from.
All right. Okay. Last one for today, last headline. This one from the Treasury Department. Treasury sanctions illicit fentanyl supply network supporting the Sinaloa cartel. So the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, sanctioned 8 individuals and 12 Mexican companies linked to the Sinaloa cartel's Los Chapitos faction for supplying precursor chemicals enabling illicit fentanyl production and trafficking into the United States. This action underscores both the evolving financial and operational networks supporting major narcotics trafficking organizations and the heightened emphasis on disrupting such flows through sanctions enforcement. So another evergreen kind of topic for us, but fentanyl and illicit flows of finances. What's unique or newsworthy about this specific round of sanctions?
Yeah, so I mean the big evolution here, and these sanctions designations targeted a bunch of labs, basically making their own precursor chemicals, or using undercover of these lab operations, importing precursor chemicals. But basically, you know, I think it really emphasizes the shift in drug production techniques used by these cartels. Mexican cartels used to import like mostly finished fentanyl or import precursor chemicals, and increasingly that shifted into Mexico. So instead of buying chemicals from China, India, which still takes place, there's been more domestic production, which changes like the monitoring, techniques you got to look out for, and changes kind of the risk profile, especially of some of these companies within Mexico. And they're all, if you look at the designations, a lot of them are like lab, right? So if you are, providing services for a company, it's the oldies but goodies in terms of risk profile. It's chemical companies, it's medical supplies, it's laboratory companies that are often used as the cover here. But yeah, I mean, if you've been playing like sanctions bingo at home, right? We now have sanctions related to state actors, scam compounds, crypto companies, and now, drug trafficking cartels, right? So again, sanctions are so broad now, and they're used in such a variety of contexts, that it's really important to have both that comprehensive view of it within your own sanctions compliance program, but also understand how it ties into these other areas of like financial crime compliance that you might be involved in at your institution, right? If you're a fraud person or an AML person, right, you're like kind of a sanctions person in some ways now too, right? Because it touches your world.
That makes sense. I mean, the more conversations we have like this, the more it just becomes clear to me that all of these things are of one piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sanctions can't be sort of disarticulated from the other typologies or the other strategies and tactics that we talk about throughout all of these different types of conversations. So, okay, great. So we're going to jump into, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I was just agreeing.
So yeah, we're going to jump into the rest of the conversation. Loving seeing where everybody's tuning in from. If you haven't already dropped a comment letting us know where you're watching from, please do that. So far, we have Canada, Lebanon, we have Nadia from the Bahamas, and Nadine, who's an Aussie, but is tuning in from Belfast. So thanks for tuning in while you're traveling, Nadine. We love that. And Jumeirah from Malaysia. So pretty broadly represented geographically in this conversation today. So let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, as we get into the conversation about sanctions, evasion, and enforcement, we would love to hear your comments, your thoughts, your questions. So please drop those in the comments, and we will do our best to respond to those. Oh, and we have somebody tuning in from Peru. So awesome. Love seeing that. Welcome to the conversation. So, okay. So the cases that we just talked about, highlight the different aspects of modern sanctions evasion: big financial penalty enforcement, large-scale fraud schemes tied to sanctionable entities, state-sponsored abuse of crypto and cyber networks, and transnational drug organizations. So together, these things underscore the evolving complexity of sanctions evasion typologies and the intensifying regulatory response, which we think is a great thing. So let's talk a little bit more about what these developments mean for compliance programs and what you, as a financial crime and compliance professional, need to know and need to be thinking about related to sanctions heading into 2025 or 2026. So, Brian, given these kind of recent enforcement actions, what would you identify right now as the most important emerging typology in sanctions evasions that our listeners, should be aware of or watching out for right now?
Whew, that's a hard question. I would love to hear from the audience too about how they would answer that question. So, audience, what do you think is the most important emerging typology? It's kind of maybe an expected answer, I guess. I was trying to think of something like totally out of the box. But but I would say stable coins and sanctions evasion is a big area to be concerned about. And it's not going to touch every institution out there, but it's emerged as, I think, a really popular technique over the last 3 to 4 years, right? Dating in part back to like the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. Russia was a big adopter of stable coins, but basically lots of different sanctions evaders like stable coins, and these other like adjacent groups like drug trafficking organizations and even some like designated terror groups like Hezbollah. There's indicators they use certain stable coins to conduct transactions or like settle accounts. What's interesting is that stable coins have really been kind of layered into more, you could call them traditional sanctions evasions networks and techniques, right? So like trade-based sanctions evasion, where you're moving some goods, to sell in evasion of sanctions, and then to settle accounts, you might use, a Tether USDT stablecoin, right? In place of like a wire transfer through a shell company network, or smuggled gold or whatever you might try to turn to in the past, right? So it's not necessarily like, in some cases it is like a fully new technique layered on top of other techniques. In other cases, stablecoins are just replacing previous payment mechanisms because they're faster or less transparent, or can still find exchanges and over the counter desks and others with like weaker KYC. So that's probably a big one. For those that aren't familiar with stablecoins out there, I know I feel like I think last time we did a stablecoin one, but this is a type of cryptocurrency that's pegged to a real world asset, typically like a fiat currency. So the biggest ones are US dollar backed stablecoins, like Tether is by far the biggest one by like total assets and total value in circulation. Interestingly, a Russian-backed entity has launched the AZA5 stablecoin. It's a ruble-backed stablecoin. So it is not reliant on kind of the US dollar ecosystem. It's easier to integrate with, the Russian financial system, and it's really taken off. So that's been a really interesting and kind of controversial development in the crypto space. Like the company behind AZA5 has like sponsored some crypto conferences and kind of put itself forth as like a legitimate participant in the crypto ecosystem.
Interesting.
Which, I mean, there might be different opinions on that, but it is definitely existing in part to help sanctioned entities evade sanctions. So I would say stablecoin sanctions evasion is a really big one. The other one, it's not new, but it's still super prevalent, is maritime sanctions evasion. Um, you know, like Iran, North Korea, Russia in particular really rely on, trade on commodities, coal, oil, biggest ones by far, but also other commodities. When we look at Iran, like, or Russia, there's timber, there's certain mined goods that are also, part of it, the way it funds its war machine, basically.
Right.
And then on the flip side, there's also the export control and weapons proliferation angle to maritime invasion too, where you have goods, sensitive goods, being shipped into these jurisdictions or to like designated terror groups that are, subject to sanctions. So, maritime evasion is a big one on both sides, both, goods to go out from sanctioned entities and goods coming into sanctioned entities. And it's still really tricky. And I see Islami had mentioned artificial intelligence. That's a big one, kind of more broadly, both on the fraud angle and on the sanctions angle. I know a lot of firms on the maritime side are trying to turn to some artificial intelligence tools to do things like, screening for behavior versus screening, static documents or names or that type of thing. Because it can be really, name screening. Yeah, a ship might not be subject to sanctions. You can't really tell, much from like the documentation, but the way that the vessel behaves might be the real indicator that something's wrong. It's turning off its transponder at certain key points. Its shipping route's really weird, that type of thing. So turning to the more behavioral indicators on the maritime side is one way that some, organizations are trying to get a handle on this. So if your institution is really embedded in like the trade finance space in particular, um, even, some smaller institutions have ties back to this too. So I would definitely be, I'm sure you already are, but I'd definitely be closely scrutinizing your maritime sanctions evasion risk. So those are, I know you asked for one answer. I gave you two: stable coins and maritime sanctions evasion. I think are going to be really big themes continuing into 2026.
Well, and that's great because we just recently had a conversation about stable coins right here. And I think for 2026 that we're already going to start planning on maybe a shadow fleets or maritime sanctions conversation, because that is really super interesting stuff. So no, great answers. I'll take two. One's fine, two's even better. So what we saw in the headlines that we just talked through was these strong connections between different types of crime related to sanctions. So the links between fraud and cybercrime and sanctions evasion. How have those connections, or how have those links between those seemingly separate types of criminal activities, how are the connections between those evolving in 2025? Like in particularly, like if we look at the pig butchering case, where, how is that growing or changing the landscape?
Yeah, totally. I'll channel my, for those that know John Taban, former HSI special agent in charge, does a lot of presentations with us. Really, really smart guy in the financial crime space. And I'll steal some of his lines here and channel my inner John Taban. I'll say that, financial criminals don't invent anything. They just use whatever has been handed them by the financial system because it works for them in the same way that it works for legitimate users, right? So if we look at like the Prince Group case that you're referring to, they relied on a lot of stablecoin transfers, a lot of formal exchanges within the financial system, and a lot of shell companies. And they do these things for the same reasons that legitimate users like stablecoins. Why are sanctions evaders turning to this type of cryptocurrency? Because it's in the name, it's stable, right? If I want to transfer something and use it as a means to move money, layer transactions, I don't want to lose half my value in more volatile cryptocurrency. So, these connections are developing in part, when we look at like scam groups, cybercrime groups, turning to the same methodologies that like other sanctions evaders are using. Um, these connections are happening in part because this is convenient, fast, and functional for both legitimate and illegitimate users, right? So kind of classic story playing out here. And in the Prince Group, a lot of it did have to do with pig butchering, obviously. So most of the transactional flows happened initially in crypto. Victim gets scammed. They're directed to send primarily Bitcoin or stable coins, were the two that they typically ask for, to a wallet. That wallet was then consolidated and moved around, layered, all moved between chains, that type of thing. And then the funds were sent to these like so-called money houses, basically these over-the-counter traders, where the crypto would be swapped for fiat, And then, as mentioned, it would actually be moved back into crypto and moved on. But what's interesting is that, at multiple points in this chain, there's intersections back into fiat, both at the time when it's initially swapped, and then again when it's ultimately pulled out of crypto and integrated back into the operations. And the Prince Group actually ran a bank, Prince Bank, that helped with this. But they also, that's been enough. I mean, not a new trend, but I would say it's a more prevalent trend is like just criminal organizations running financial institutions. um,
Makes things easier when
makes
you
things easier,
own the
yeah.
bank.
But in addition, they use all the traditional methods like shell companies, particularly shell companies in seemingly legitimate jurisdictions. Hong Kong was a big one. Singapore was probably the biggest one. Sometimes it's referred to as Singapore washing, to utilize Singapore's generally good reputation to set up companies and then run transactions through them and launder through them. So yeah, I mean, again, evolving in terms of the tech, the underlying illicit typology that develops the flow, but then when it gets into a lot of the laundering techniques and the evasion techniques, they end up looking like the same old to some extent, with a layer of new tech that adds convenience or adds speed thrown on top of it.
So the more things change, the more they stay the same in some
To some
respects.
extent, yeah.
Okay. Well, since you mentioned shell companies, it looks like we've got a great question from Gene, who's tuning in here. So we appreciate that. So watching the financial shell game between corporate espionage and / IP theft, as well as counterfeit sales, which fund human trafficking, drug trafficking cartels, and terrorism, and seeing the connection between human child trafficking and sextortion crime rings in Africa, funding terrorist orgs in the Middle East. Are you seeing enough collaboration among international intelligence agencies to, quote, follow the money trails and take investigations further than the initial convictions? Great question, Gene. We definitely appreciate that. What do you think, Brian? I know we have talked about the need for greater international collaboration. What do you think in response to this?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is no, but kind of yes, but ultimately no. So, no in the I think the heart of the question is, are they following the money and really getting at the assets in question, right? We're talking billions of dollars moving through these illicit activities that you mentioned here. Counterfeit, not even billion, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars, right? And honestly, I think where we get it, we being financial crime prevention in both the public and private sector, get it most right is in the terrorist financing world, in part because there are laws and regulations on the books that involve asset seizure and asset forfeiture, or expedite that, at least in some countries, if it's the proceeds of terrorism. But yeah, overall, in terms of the the question being, do we follow the money and get the assets in a law enforcement context? No, unfortunately, the asset recovery results are still pretty abysmal across the board in the financial crime arena. The kind of yes part comes in the fact that I think, and I don't have like any way to officially track this, but I think that on a federal level, like national level law enforcement, so we're talking about, like Austrac in Australia, and FinCEN in the US, and FinTrack in Canada, and the law enforcement agencies, like FBI, Interpol, etc. That level of cooperation has improved. It's gotten better, and even ways to share information, but just overall collaboration, international actions. I mean, the Prince Group case was a joint UK-US investigation, but also involved cooperation from law enforcement in Thailand, Laos, other countries. And these types of joint international operations, Interpol has gotten very good at this. Certain Latin American countries will collaborate on it too. So that's actually, I think, a bright spot. I think that's good. Where it really breaks down is the local level, unfortunately. And this is not a knock on any local law enforcement. It's just they don't have the resources and expertise. But that's where these cases originate, and that's where a lot of them need to play out. And build in order to get to the federal level. So, these big takedowns that like Interpol does every year, they'll do like these periodic operations are good, but where we could, I think, make a lot of progress both on just the general enforcement and asset recovery side is on the local level, right? Like when someone gets scammed, they're they might put like a complaint into IC3, and that may at some point potentially get picked up by like an FBI agent, but more likely than not, they're going to call their local police department. And this is true in US and most other countries. Um, and the local police are by and large not resourced or trained on what to do about that. And so it's going to go nowhere. So are we getting better at asset recovery? I would say not really. Are we getting better at national level cooperation? Yes, but the missing gap there is the local level law enforcement that can really kind of build those cases, move them up to federal or state level if needed, and allow for better pursuit of not just the financial criminals themselves, but as Jane says, the money trails.
All right. Okay. So we talked about the record fine in the Zeltox case in Canada. So what does that case tell us about the trend towards fintech, crypto services, these new technology companies and services becoming focal points for sanctions evaders?
It tells us that they like them a lot.
Tells us that they're doing it.
They're doing it. No, I mean, I think, yeah, that is the one of the key takeaways, right? Like these are, these industries are at high risk for use in sanctions evasion, and it's not unique. Banks are too, right? Lots of organizations are at high risk for use in sanctions evasion. But it means in a fully online context, right, where you're doing all your, which frankly, this is true of most institutions, but if you are doing all of your business online, particularly if you have a global footprint, you need very strong both initial KYC measures in place and then sanctions evasion measures that are way beyond your usual sanction screening at this point, like name screening, static name screening up front and then ongoing name screening. Not good enough. You really need to be pulling in like geographic information, and you can do that, right? Like if someone's logging in on their phone, where their phone is.
Right.
There's ways to know where their phone is, right? And if someone's using a way to obscure, their location, there's ways to detect that too. Like how long is it taking to ping the information back and forth between their phone? If you're in Canada and the client's supposed to be in Toronto, it should be real fast. If they're jumping between a VPN, in Lebanon and then another one located in Malta, back to another one in Virginia, and now they're coming to you. It's still fast, but it's a lot slower, relatively speaking, than it should be, right? So there's lots of ways that you can get at this, like geolocation data, device data. But increasingly, that's very much an expectation that you're pulling it into the program. And that's particularly true, if you're operating in the crypto and fintech space where it's fully online and all your interactions are virtual and potentially serving an international audience.
All right. Makes sense. All of the clues come together. Okay. Got another great question from somebody in the audience here. This one comes from Yurio. And Yurio says, what are the most common typologies of sanctions evasion that financial institutions should be monitoring in 2026? Great question, Yuri. Thank you.
Yeah. Great question. Tough to answer because, as always, classic lawyerly, compliancy type answer. It depends on your type of institution and your jurisdiction, right? So, I can't really give a global answer. Obviously, if you are at an institution that isn't in any way touching like maritime trade, then sanctions evasion via maritime, vessels is going to be a really important one. Shadow fleets have been a big area of focus, like in the EU. So, vessels that are basically changing their flag all the time. A lot of these ones that are running oil for Russia were based in the UAE or the Marshall Islands. Those are like, I think, very widely outpacing other jurisdictions in terms of where they're located. So definitely, like, the the U.S. recently sanctioned two very large oil companies in Russia, Rosneft and Lukoil. So looking ahead to 2026, I would say they're going to need new ways to run oil, and they're probably going to be turning increasingly to Russia's shadow fleet of tankers. So maritime evasion is going to stay very high up on the list. The other one that we've been, gabbing about quite a bit is crypto-based sanctions evasion, particularly stable coins. So you're going to want to look out for transactions running through your institution that might be going to a crypto exchange in particular, generally, or the classic stuff like shell companies, particularly like technology companies. There was a really interesting case recently where a Russian national was operating in the US. He was running a supposed like money remittance service, but it was a cover to take transactions from sanctions individuals in Russia and transactions with ties to sanctioned Russian banks. And he was getting paid in stable coins, USDT in this case, and buying goods in the US or moving transactions through the US financial system. And he was running this service, Avita Pay, in part as kind of like a cover to his operation. So, fintech based sanctions evasion might be another one, using fintechs as a cover for sanctions evasion activity. The other one that you have to be very careful, about is procurement of electronics and sensitive goods for weapons programs. So avionics, like aeronautic industry stuff you can put in drones or airplanes or missiles, um, is a big one. Microchips, computer parts, all of those types of things. When we look at Russia, North Korea, and also lots of like really generic stuff that's still super risky. Certain types of ball bearings are a classic example. Certain types of ball bearings are really important for missiles. Triggered spark gaps, also known as spark plugs. Those can be totally generic if or totally safe if they're a certain type, but other types are really important for detonators for like warheads. So these so to sum up, I would say those are, again, it's going to depend on your institution, where you're located, but some high risk typologies would be continued risk through maritime sanctions evasion, particularly due to this Russian oil sanctions, the need to move a ton of oil through shadow fleets, sanctions evasion via crypto, particularly stable coins. So look out for connections to exchanges, and then sanctions evasion via like fintech sector as a cover for other activity.
All right. Excellent. And we've got a question, or really a comment from Levi. Levi says, spot on timing as traditional high risk sectors tighten. US dollar and alt asset channels are clearly the next sectors to keep an eye on.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree.
That's great. And then another comment, not a question, but I've tried to map the Prince Group case from existing indictment and forfeiture complaint, but there's still some missing details. So if anyone else is out there has been trying to map the case, connect with this user, we cannot see their LinkedIn profile in this view right now, but guys, get together in the comments and see if y'all can help each other out, share some information.
Yeah.
All right.
I definitely agree that, like, reading through it, there's a lot of unanswered questions in the Prince Group. It's a very twisty case. Even the question of like, how did this guy Chen Z or Vincent Z like become the head of this scam group is not entirely clear. So I'm sure there's more going on behind the scenes, and he maybe has the backing of some like powerful organized crime groups that aren't necessarily named in the indictment, but are also out there.
Still lots of mysteries. And we have another question from Yurio. Yurio says, as global power structures shift towards a multipolar world, do you see sanctions remaining an effective compliance and enforcement tool, or will they become less relevant as alternative financial systems and regional alliances emerge? And how should compliance professionals prepare for that type of world, that type of future? Great
Yeah.
question, Yurio. Thank you.
Super good question, and really difficult, right? I mean, you're spot on. Like, it's multipolar is definitely the theme of 2026 when we look at lots of areas of financial crime or global trade or other aspects. I think you're starting out at the right place by thinking about it, right? In terms of the preparation piece of the question, sanctions is often a very reactive space where it's like, there's new designations, make sure the lists are working, test them out, run AKAs and alternate spellings, right? So, which obviously you got to do. But the proactive element that you're pointing to here of like thinking about what it looks like in the future is a really good place to start. I think one obvious thing is like map where you're doing business and what exposure you have, right? Because there are, as you're saying, there are increasingly the use of like counter sanctions. China has been using counter sanctions against US based entities and persons as a result of like trade limitations or sanctions on China. Russia, same thing. Russia, a lot of jurisdictions don't have as much exposure to, so it's less of an issue. But some places have tons of exposure to China. So you have to think about your various competing sanctions regimes based on your business footprint, and then you have to ask, which ones essentially, are most relevant, highest risk, that type of thing. So yeah, I mean, preparing for multiple potentially competing sanctions regime is one place to start. Mapping your operations and your business footprint, your customer base, it's all going to be part of that. Will sanctions become less effective? I think we kind of had a case study with Russia. Now, granted, the Russian sanctions were very kind of piecemeal. They weren't full sanctions on Russia, like from the jump. They left out a lot of major Russian companies that have much later, like, Lukoil, Rosneft, have not been subject to sanctions until very recently. These are the two largest oil companies in Russia. You would think that if we were going to try to really like crack down on Russia, we would have done this a while ago. But here we are. So, it's not a full test case because the way sanctions were rolled out and how, frankly, carefully it was done by the U.S. and Europe, so as not to harm, a lot of U.S. and European interests and other jurisdictions too. It's not just U.S. and Europe that issued them, but those are the two biggest ones. Anyway, it's not a perfect test case, but the fact that Russia has been able to, survive, and not just survive, but undertake like a very large war during this sanctions regime indicates that sanctions are maybe losing some of their heft. I think sanctions evaders have gotten better, and particularly when we look at Russia, Russian sanctions aren't new. There were some pretty significant ones dating back to the Crimean invasion back in 2014, right? So they've had 10 years to prepare sanctions evasion techniques and networks, and they've been using them. Smaller jurisdictions, designated terrorist groups, that type of thing, obviously have a little less resources. So I think they'll probably still be more effective in those contexts, right? But as we shift to like ruble-backed stable coins, and obviously China is trying to establish itself as more of a reserve currency. So there, de-dollarization is a real force in both the fiat and crypto worlds, and I think it does, raise some serious questions going forward about the efficacy of a sanctions regime that's really kind of led by U.S. and European allies.
All right. Had a quick follow-up, and we are at time, so we're going to jam through this one really quick. But a quick follow-up question from Gene, who says, regarding the gaps in local law enforcement skills, needed to take investigations to the next level. Does ACFCS offer or recommend any types of courses or certifications that investigators should pursue in terms of addressing some of that?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'll be selfish and throw one out there that ACFCS launched pretty recently. It's our digital assets compliance specialization. Um, this is specific to crypto and digital assets, but that is I would say a skills gap and a knowledge gap, not only on the law enforcement side, but for a lot of us. And this is a really good program. It has three components: basic, intermediate, advanced, and it really walks you through foundations, intermediate, advanced, walks you through all of them. Online, self-paced course, includes a lot of dynamic, interactive activities, little exercises, scenario-based questions along the way. So, if you're looking to bridge that knowledge gap specifically for digital assets and some of the risk areas, illicit typologies, blockchain tracing techniques, etc., this is a great place to start. And coming in the new year, we're actually going to be running a program to help get that into the hands of law enforcement on a complementary basis for certain cohorts or applicants to, like, basically a law enforcement scholarship program. So be on the lookout for more details about that. We really think that, to your point, Gene, that's a really important issue to address at ACFCS.
Yes, and if any of you have already taken or started that DAX course, we would love to hear your feedback on that. You can drop it in the comments, or you can shoot us a direct message. I know some people, we've heard really great feedback already, and of course, it is brought to you not only by our incredible experts here at ACFCS, but we worked with some of the greatest thinkers, founders, and investigators in this field to create that course. So absolutely check it out. You can find it under the training tab at acfcs.org, as well as our whole catalog of incredible trainings, certification, membership options. Great place to supercharge your career and address some of the gaps and shortfalls that we have talked about here today. And I know we had a couple of questions that are in the comments that we're not going to have time to get to. We will try to respond to you in the comments with some feedback on some of those questions. Guys, we will be back next month also with another FinCrime Friday chat. That is going to be our year-end review. It's going to be coming up on December 19th. So we generally run those on the last Friday of the month, but because of the Christmas holiday and lots of people being out for family time, we're going to bump that one up just kind of like we did this one. So make sure that you're paying attention for that. Also, I don't think we have much information about it up on the website yet, but in January, we will have our anti-human trafficking series. Very important, critical topic. And again, it was our inaugural run on this last year, I believe. And I think we got really great feedback. We've got some incredible experts, to help us help you tackle taking a bite out of a really heinous and awful typology of crime here. So thank you. Brian, did you have any other events that you wanted to shout out or courses that you wanted to make sure that people are aware of?
Nope. Definitely tune into that anti-human trafficking webinar series that's going to run January 6th. Will be open to everyone. So, members, non-members, you'll be able to join that January 6th session. And then following that, every Tuesday of January, there'll be 2 sessions focused on various aspects of investigating, building anti-human trafficking compliance, understanding, key risk areas. So it's going to be a really, really strong, program to help you take on, as Clayton said, this really awful criminal risk. So if you're an ACFCS member, make sure that you tune in for the whole thing. If you're not a member, again, consider joining. You get access to not only that, but we do at least one members only webinar every month. We have a whole bunch of online courses. One of them is actually on pig butchering. Another is on sanctions evasion and weapons proliferation, particularly maritime sanctions evasion. That course is actually 4 hours. So if you're looking for a real deep dive into that, that's included as part of your membership, along with a host of other online courses. You know, podcasts, a webinar archive, ton of member benefits and ongoing training benefits. So definitely check out that series. And big shout out to anybody in the audience who is an ACFCS member. And even bigger shout out to anybody in the audience who is a CFCS certified professional. So we love you out there. Thank you for being a part of the community, building your skills, and doing what you're doing.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Brian, awesome to have you as usual. Thank you to everybody for the great questions, and stay vigilant.
Lovely audience today. Really interactive. Appreciate y'all.
All right. Bye, guys.